It was a cold evening in the city, and the tall glass building of one of the biggest companies glowed under the soft streetlights. Inside, people were rushing everywhere. The office was busier than usual because tonight wasn't just any night. It was the company's annual charity event, the one the CEO personally hosted every year. Tables were being set, lights were being checked, and the sound team was testing microphones. Everything had to be perfect. The CEO sat in his office, looking at the event schedule on his tablet. He was a man known for being calm and strict, someone who rarely smiled but always got things done. His employees respected him, even feared him a little because he didn't tolerate mistakes. But tonight, even he looked tense. The schedule was flawless except for one thing. The pianist, the performer who was supposed to play at the event, had just canceled an hour ago. He rubbed his forehead, feeling the pressure building. The event was important, not just for charity but for reputation. Dozens of business partners, investors, and guests were already arriving. A silence in the program wasn't an option. He needed music, calm, emotional background music that could set the tone for the evening. An assistant knocked softly on his door. "Sir, we tried calling every musician we could reach, but no one is available at such short notice," she said nervously. He looked up, his expression serious. "Keep trying," he replied. His tone wasn't harsh, but it carried the weight of someone who didn't want excuses. The assistant nodded quickly and left. Minutes passed, and the stress in the air grew heavier. The staff whispered among themselves, some looking at the clock, others checking their phones, hoping for a miracle. Then, near the lobby entrance, a security guard approached the event coordinator and said quietly, "There's a woman and a little girl here. The girl says she can play the piano." The coordinator blinked, confused. "A little girl? How little?" "Maybe 9 or 10, the guard replied. "She said she saw the event poster outside and wanted to help." The coordinator almost laughed. It sounded ridiculous. A child replacing a professional pianist? Still, desperate times called for desperate ideas. After a quick moment of hesitation, she decided to inform the CEO. When she entered his office and told him, he stared at her for a few seconds, unsure if he had heard right. "A child?" he repeated slowly. "This is not a school recital. This is a formal charity event." "I know, sir," she replied carefully. "But maybe we can at least listen? We don't have any other option right now." He leaned back in his chair, silent. It was absurd. But what choice did he have? The guests were already arriving, and silence in a hall full of important people would look terrible. Finally, he sighed. "Fine. Bring her in." A few minutes later, the door opened again. The little girl walked in, holding a small, worn music folder in her hands. Her mother followed quietly behind her. The girl had neat hair tied in a ponytail and wore a simple dress that looked a bit old but clean. Her shoes were slightly scuffed, but her eyes were bright, full of quiet confidence. The CEO studied her for a moment. He had expected shyness or fear, but instead, she stood straight and looked at him calmly. "You said you can play the piano?" he asked, trying to keep his tone even. She nodded. "Yes, sir. I play at home and sometimes at the community center." Her voice was soft but steady. Her mother added quickly, "She's been playing since she was 5. Her teacher says she has a natural gift. We only came because she saw the poster outside and said she wanted to help." The CEO glanced at the folder in her hands. "Do you have your music?" The girl nodded again and held it up. He could see old sheets of paper, some with small notes scribbled on them in pencil. Something about her seriousness made him pause. Most children her age would be nervous in a big office like this, but she wasn't. She was calm, almost too calm for her age. He stood and motioned toward the piano in the corner of the office, an elegant instrument used for small events and meetings. "Play something for me," he said simply. The girl walked over, carefully set her folder down, and took a seat. Her feet barely reached the pedals. For a moment, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The first notes that filled the room were soft, almost like a whisper. But as she continued, the sound grew richer, full of emotion. The The melody wasn't something from a famous composer. It felt personal, as if each note carried a memory. The CEO found himself watching her hands move effortlessly across the keys, small yet sure, as if she wasn't just playing music but telling a story through sound. The mother stood quietly, her eyes glistening. Even the assistant, who had been standing by the door, forgot to breathe for a moment. The room, once filled with tension, now felt strangely peaceful. When the girl stopped, the final note hung in the air for a long second before fading away. She turned to look at the CEO, waiting. He didn't speak right away. He had heard countless performances before, from professionals, students, even orchestras. But there was something different about this. There was no show-off technique, no forced emotion. It was simple and pure, like something that came straight from the heart. Finally, he said, "That was very good." His tone was quieter now, softer. "Where did you learn to play like that?" The girl looked down for a moment, then answered, "My dad taught me. He loved music. He said every song has feelings inside it, and if you play it right, people can feel those too." There was silence in the room again, but it wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that carried warmth. The CEO nodded slowly, then looked at her mother. "You said she saw the poster and came here on her own?" "Yes," her mother replied, smiling faintly. "She said maybe her music could help someone tonight." Something about that line touched him more than he expected. Maybe it was the sincerity in her voice, or maybe it reminded him of something buried deep inside. Something he hadn't felt in years. After a long pause, he said, "We don't have any other performer available. Would you be willing to play at the event tonight?" The girl's eyes widened in surprise, and then she nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'd love to." Her mother looked at him, slightly nervous. "Are you sure, sir? She's still young." "I'm sure," he said firmly, though there was a trace of a smile in his voice now. Sometimes the right music doesn't come from age or experience. It comes from heart. The assistant glanced at him, shocked to hear him speak so gently. She couldn't remember the last time he had said something like that. He turned to the girl. "We start in an hour. I want you to be ready. You can use the piano on stage for a few minutes before the guests arrive." The girl smiled, her excitement clear but still controlled. "Thank you, sir. I won't disappoint you." When they left the office, the CEO sat down again, staring at the piano she had just played. The sound of her music still echoed faintly in his mind. It was strange, but he felt something shift inside him. Something small, something he couldn't name. For years, he had lived with walls around his emotions, too focused on work to feel much else. But that small girl, with her calm face and soft music, had somehow broken through. Downstairs, as she practiced softly in the event hall, a few staff members stopped to listen. The melody floated through the air, gentle but full of life. One worker whispered to another, "Is that the little girl who just came in? She plays like a professional." The other nodded, still listening. "No, she plays like someone who feels everything." Back in his office, the CEO stood by the window, watching the city lights blur against the dark sky. He didn't know it yet, but tonight would be the start of something he would never forget. The unexpected request of a little girl was about to change not only the course of the evening but something deeper. Something inside his own heart that had been silent for far too long. The large hall glowed with soft golden lights, and the sound of quiet conversation filled the space. Guests in elegant clothes moved between tables, greeting one another with polite smiles. The stage stood at the far end, decorated simply, with a grand piano placed at its center. A few workers were still making small adjustments, checking cables and lights before the evening officially began. In one corner of the hall, the little girl sat on a small stool near the stage, her music folder resting on her lap. She looked calm, but her fingers kept tapping lightly on the cover, as if practicing invisible keys. Her mother stood beside her, gently fixing a loose strand of her hair. "You don't have to be nervous," her mother said softly. "Just play like you always do at home." The girl nodded, though her eyes wandered toward the empty seats that would soon be filled with people. The hall looked much bigger than she had imagined. She took a deep breath and whispered, "I think Dad would have liked this piano." Her mother smiled faintly. "He would be proud of you no matter what." At that moment, the CEO walked into the hall, speaking quietly with his assistant. He was checking last-minute arrangements, making sure every part of the event ran smoothly. But when his eyes caught the little girl sitting by the piano, he slowed down. For a second, he just watched her. Something about her calm focus reminded him of his late wife, who used to play piano in their home years ago. She had always said music had the power to speak what words couldn't. He had forgotten that feeling until the girl played in his office. He approached her and said, "Are you ready?" She looked up, her hands still resting on her folder. "Yes, sir. I practiced a little." He gave a small nod. "Good. Just do what you did earlier. Play from your heart." Her mother thanked him politely, but there was still a hint of worry in her eyes. She knew how important this evening was and didn't want her daughter to feel too much pressure. But the girl didn't seem afraid. She only asked, "Can I play the same song first?" "Of course," he replied. It was beautiful. As the CEO moved away to greet the arriving guests, the mother sat beside her daughter again. The girl opened her music folder and looked at the handwritten notes inside. Some pages were wrinkled. Some had faint pencil marks where her father had written reminders years ago. "Listen to your heart. Don't rush. Let it speak." She ran her fingers lightly over the words, her chest tightening with a mix of sadness and warmth. Her father used to sit beside her during practice, sometimes humming softly, sometimes just watching quietly with his eyes closed, smiling at every note she played. He never raised his voice, never rushed her. And when he got sick, even when he couldn't speak much, he would gesture toward the piano, wanting her to play. That was their way of talking when words failed. She still remembered the last song she played for him. He had closed his eyes and said, in a weak but gentle voice, "Keep playing. Even when you think no one is listening, someone always is." It was the last thing he said before he passed away. Since then, she played every day. It made her feel like he was still there, listening. Back in the hall, the sound of clinking glasses and polite laughter grew as the guests settled in. The CEO stood near the back, greeting a few business partners, but his mind wasn't entirely on the conversations. Every few seconds, his eyes drifted toward the piano. He didn't understand why, but there was something about this girl that made him curious. Not just about her talent, but about her story. His assistant noticed his distraction and whispered, "Sir, everything is ready to begin. Would you like to start with the introduction or go straight to the performance?" He thought for a moment, then said, "Let's start with the performance. I think the guests will appreciate something peaceful before the speeches." Soon, the lights dimmed slightly, and a soft announcement echoed through the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us this evening. Before we begin, please enjoy a special piano performance." The girl's mother gave her a gentle nod. "You can do this." The girl took a slow breath, stood up, and walked toward the stage. Her small steps echoed lightly on the wooden floor. The hall grew quiet. People turned their heads, surprised to see a child instead of a professional musician. A few guests exchanged curious looks, whispering softly, but she didn't notice. She climbed onto the piano bench, adjusted her music, and placed her fingers on the keys. For a moment, the silence was complete. Then she began to play. The first notes were slow and delicate, like a whisper of wind. Then the melody grew, flowing gently through the air. The sound filled the hall, wrapping around every table, every listener. It wasn't just music. It was emotion. Her playing carried something deeper, something pure. Even those who didn't understand music could feel it. The CEO watched from his table, his expression unreadable. But inside something stirred. The melody brought back old memories. His wife sitting at their home piano, the way her fingers danced across the keys, the way the music made their small living room feel alive. He remembered the night she passed away, how he had locked that piano room and never opened it again. Until tonight, he had almost forgotten what real music felt like. The little girl's song changed slowly, becoming softer, sadder, like a story without words. Her mother watched from the side, holding back tears. She knew what her daughter was feeling in each note. The melody wasn't just practice. It was love, loss, and memory, all mixed together. When the final note came, it lingered in the air, trembling for a few seconds before fading completely. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the entire hall broke into applause. People stood, clapping louder and louder, some even wiping their eyes. The girl smiled shyly, bowing her head before stepping down. The CEO stood as well, clapping slowly, his eyes still on her. He didn't understand how such a young child could make people feel so deeply, but he knew one thing for sure. She had just turned an ordinary event into something unforgettable. When she returned to her seat, her mother hugged her tightly. "You did it," she whispered. The girl smiled, whispering back, "I think Dad heard me." Later that evening, after the speeches and dinner, the CEO found them sitting together near the corner of the hall. He walked over, and both stood up politely. "That was a wonderful performance," he said. "You played with a lot of heart." The girl looked up at him and said quietly, "Thank you, sir. I played one of the songs my dad taught me." He nodded. "He must have been a good teacher." Her mother smiled softly. "He loved music. It helped him through everything. After he passed away, she kept playing. It's how she remembers him." Something about those words hit him harder than he expected. He hesitated, then asked, "Do you always play the same song?" The girl shook her head. "No. Sometimes I make new ones. My dad used to say every day has its own song. You just have to listen for it." The CEO smiled faintly. It was such a simple idea, yet so powerful. He hadn't listened for music in a long time. Not in his office, not in his life. Everything had become numbers, meetings, and silence. But now, listening to her words, he realized how much he missed that part of himself. He said quietly, "Would you like to play again at the end of the evening? Maybe something happy this time." The girl's face lit up. "Yes, sir. I have one." "Good," he said with a small smile. "We could all use something happy." As he walked away, his assistant glanced at him curiously. She had never seen him smile like that before. It wasn't the polite smile he gave at meetings. It was real, quiet, and warm. Back near the stage, the girl sat again with her mother. She opened her folder and pulled out a sheet of music with a few pencil marks. On the top of the page, in slightly messy handwriting, were her father's words. "Play for joy." She traced the letters with her finger and whispered, "I will." In that large hall full of people and lights, she was just one small girl. But her music had done something no speech or award could do. It had made people feel. It had reminded them of something simple and human, something everyone forgets when life gets too loud. And as the night went on, the CEO realized that this little girl, who had walked into his office by chance, had brought back a part of himself he thought was gone forever. The part that could still be touched by something as simple as a song. The night had settled deep outside, and through the tall glass windows, the city lights shimmered like quiet stars. Inside the grand hall, the atmosphere had changed completely. After the girl's first performance, something felt different, softer, more human. People who had come for business and polite conversation now spoke in warm voices, their smiles genuine. It was as if her music had reminded everyone what it felt like to simply feel. The CEO sat at the main table, but his mind wasn't on the conversations around him. He kept replaying the melody in his head. The little girl's music had stirred something inside him that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't just about skill, it was about heart. He didn't quite understand how a child could hold so much emotion in her fingertips. The evening moved along with speeches, light laughter, and soft background music. Waiters carried trays of food, and glasses clinked quietly. But all through it, people kept glancing toward the stage, as if waiting for her to return. Even those who hadn't believed a child could perform at such an event were now hoping to hear her again. Finally, when dinner ended and the lights dimmed slightly, the CEO rose to speak. He wasn't usually one for emotional speeches, but tonight, something in him wanted to say more than the usual thanks. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice steady but thoughtful. Tonight we were reminded that sometimes the most powerful things come from the simplest places. Earlier this evening, we heard a performance that touched us all. It reminded us of kindness, of love, and of the memories that shape who we are. He paused and glanced toward the girl sitting quietly with her mother near the stage. I think we could all use one more song. A soft murmur of approval spread across the room, followed by applause. The girl looked at her mother, who gave her a small nod. She stood up, straightened her dress, and walked toward the stage again. This time she didn't look nervous. She walked with quiet confidence, her small steps echoing against the floor. As she reached the piano, she placed her music folder down, but she didn't open it. She looked out at the crowd, her eyes scanning the faces of people waiting for her to begin. Then she looked up at the lights for a brief second, almost as if looking for someone who wasn't there. Her mother noticed the gesture and felt her throat tighten. The girl took a deep breath, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. The melody was different this time, brighter, full of movement and warmth. It carried a feeling of sunlight and open air, like laughter on a good day. The notes danced, rising and falling gracefully, filling the room with gentle energy. It wasn't sad like before. It was hopeful, like the sound of someone learning to smile again after a long time. The audience leaned forward, drawn in by every note. Even those who didn't usually care for music felt the rhythm pull at their hearts. A few guests closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. The girl played with such focus that it seemed like the world around her disappeared. Her small hands moved effortlessly, gliding across the keys with natural grace. The CEO watched her from his table, his eyes softer than anyone had ever seen. The song carried him back in time, to a day long ago, when his wife had played a similar tune at home. He could almost see her there again, her laughter mixing with the sound of the piano. He remembered how, after her passing, he had stopped listening to music altogether. It had hurt too much. But now, listening to this child play, it didn't hurt. It felt peaceful, like a quiet reminder that love never really leaves. It just changes shape. The girl's fingers slowed, and the melody softened, like the end of a story being gently told. The last few notes faded into silence, leaving a kind of stillness in the air that no one wanted to break. For several long seconds, the hall was completely quiet. Then, slowly, the applause began again. Soft at first, then louder, growing into a standing ovation. People rose from their chairs, clapping with genuine admiration. Some even shouted words of praise, but the girl just smiled shyly and bowed her head. Her mother's eyes filled with tears as she watched. She knew how much courage it had taken for her daughter to step onto that stage. She also knew the reason behind every note, the memory of the man they both loved and missed every day. The CEO stood, still clapping, but there was something more in his expression. A deep respect, maybe even gratitude. As the girl stepped down from the stage, he walked toward her, ignoring the people trying to speak with him. When he reached her, he crouched slightly so their eyes met. "That was incredible," he said quietly. "You didn't just play a song. You shared something real. Thank you." The girl smiled politely. "Thank you, sir. I played one that my dad made for me." The CEO nodded slowly. It sounded like happiness. Her mother approached and added softly, "Her father used to say music could heal things you can't see." He looked at her for a moment and said, "He was right." Then he turned back to the girl. "Would you mind telling me more about him? About how you learned?" The girl glanced at her mother for permission. When she nodded, the girl began to speak softly. "He was sick for a long time, but he still played every day. He said music made him forget the pain. When he couldn't play anymore, he asked me to play instead. He said if I played with love, it would reach him wherever he went." Her words were simple, but they carried so much meaning that the CEO felt his chest tighten. For years, he had avoided anything that reminded him of loss. He had buried himself in work, in meetings, in noise, but hearing this small girl talk about love and memory made him realize something he had forgotten. Grief isn't something to run from. It's something to carry gently. He said quietly, "Your father must have been very proud of you." She nodded, smiling a little. I think he was. Sometimes when I play, I feel like he's listening. The CEO stayed silent for a moment, his eyes drifting toward the piano. He could still hear the echo of her music in his mind. Then he said, "Would you like to play again someday? Maybe for more people." The girl looked up at him, surprised. "You mean here?" He nodded. "Yes, maybe at our next event. People need to hear music like yours. It reminds them of what matters." Her face lit up with quiet joy. "I'd love to." Her mother placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Thank you, sir. You don't know how much that means to her." The CEO smiled faintly. "Actually," he said softly, "I think I do." Later, after most guests had left, the hall was nearly empty. The workers were clearing tables and rolling up cables. The girl sat by the piano one last time, her fingers resting on the keys. The CEO stood a few steps away, watching. "You can play one more if you'd like," he said. She looked up, surprised. "Really?" He nodded. "The room's quiet now. Sometimes music sounds best when it's just for a few people." She smiled and began to play a soft lullaby, one that her father used to hum to her at bedtime. The sound drifted gently through the empty hall. It was peaceful, almost like a farewell. The CEO closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound settle deep in his heart. When she finished, there was no applause this time, just a long, comforting silence. He walked closer and said, "That was beautiful." Then, after a pause, he added, "Would you do something for me?" She tilted her head curiously. "What is it?" "Keep playing," he said. "Don't stop no matter what. There's something special in your music. It brings people back to what they've lost, and what they still have." She nodded seriously. "I will, sir." As they left the hall, the CEO stayed behind for a few minutes. He looked at the piano, remembering the years he had avoided music altogether. Then he walked over and pressed a single key. The note rang out softly, echoing in the empty space. For the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. Outside, the little girl held her mother's hand as they walked toward the car. She glanced up at the tall building one last time and said quietly, "He looked sad at first, but now he looks happy." Her mother smiled. "Maybe your music helped him remember something important." The girl thought for a moment, then nodded. "That's what Dad used to say music was for, to remind people they still have hearts." And as the car drove away, the faint glow of the hall lights reflected in the window beside her. She smiled, knowing her father would have been proud. Somewhere inside that big building, her song was still echoing quietly, just like her father's words, soft, warm, and full of life. The next morning, the tall glass building looked quiet again. The event from the night before was over, but its memory lingered. The staff talked about the performance in whispers as they cleaned up the hall, stacking chairs and rolling away cables. Everyone seemed to remember that moment when the little girl had played and made the entire room silent with emotion. It wasn't something they were going to forget anytime soon. The CEO arrived early that day, as he always did. His office felt the same, yet something about the air was different. He placed his briefcase on the desk and sat down, but instead of diving straight into his usual work, he looked out the window. His reflection stared back at him, thoughtful and calm. For years, mornings like this had all felt the same. Meetings, calls, numbers, but today, for the first time, he didn't feel the usual rush. He felt peaceful. On the corner of his desk lay the event folder, the one that contained all the details from the previous night. But tucked beneath it was something he hadn't expected to keep. A folded piece of paper. He opened it carefully and saw that it was a handwritten note from the girl's mother. It simply said, "Thank you for believing in her." The handwriting was soft and neat, and at the bottom was a small drawing, 2 tiny music notes connected by a heart. He smiled faintly. He didn't remember the last time something so small had affected him this much. A light knock came at the door. His assistant peeked in. "Good morning, sir. There's someone in the lobby asking to see you." It's the same little girl and her mother. He looked up in surprise. "Here? Did they say why?" "She said she forgot something last night and wanted to return it in person." He stood up immediately. "Send them in." Moments later, The girl and her mother walked into his office. The girl held her old music folder close to her chest, and her mother smiled politely. "Good morning, sir. We hope we're not disturbing you." "Not at all," he said kindly. "Please have a seat. What brings you here?" The girl opened her folder carefully and pulled out a small photograph. "This," she said softly. "It was inside one of my music pages, and I think it belongs to you." He frowned slightly, curious. She handed it to him, and as soon as he looked at it, he froze. It was an old photo, years old, of a piano sitting in a small community center. In the corner of the photo was a plaque with a familiar engraving. Donated by the Sterling Foundation, his company's charity branch. He stared at it, stunned. "Where did you get this piano?" he asked quietly. The girl's mother answered, "At the community center near Maple Street. That's where she learned to play. They said the piano was donated a long time ago, by someone who wanted to bring music to the children in the area." The CEO leaned back slowly in his chair. His mind drifted back to a memory he hadn't visited in years. After his wife had passed away, he had donated her piano to that same community center. It had been her favorite instrument, the one she used to play every evening while he listened from the living room. He remembered standing in that small center years ago, signing the donation papers, thinking he would never be able to listen to that piano again. He had wanted it to help someone else heal, even though he himself couldn't. Now, sitting here, he realized that the same piano had found its way to this little girl, the girl who had unknowingly brought him back to music. He looked at her, speechless for a moment. "That piano, it used to belong to my wife," he said softly. "I donated it years ago." The girl blinked in surprise. "Really? That's the one I learned on. Still there. The keys are a little old, but I love it." Her mother smiled gently. Maybe it was meant to find her. She always said that piano had a special sound. The CEO felt a lump form in his throat. He nodded slowly. "It did. My wife used to say the same thing." The room fell into a comfortable silence. The sound of the city outside faded as if the world itself had paused to listen. Finally, he said, "Do you still go there often?" The girl nodded. "Every weekend. I help some of the younger kids learn the keys. They don't have teachers all the time, so I try to help them." He couldn't help but smile. "That's very kind of you." Then, after a short pause, he said, "Would you like to visit it again together one day? I'd like to see that piano again. If that's all right." Her eyes widened with excitement. "You want to come see it?" He nodded. "Yes, I think it's time I do." A few days later, on a sunny afternoon, he drove to the community center with them. The building was small but lively, filled with the sound of children's laughter. Posters with colorful handprints decorated the walls. The moment they stepped inside, the familiar scent of old wood and faint paint filled the air. The girl led the way to the music room. As soon as the CEO entered, his steps slowed. There, against the far wall, stood the piano. It looked older now. Its wood had faded a little and a few of the keys were chipped, but it was unmistakable. It was the same piano he had once watched his wife play. His heart ached and warmed at the same time. The girl ran her hand over the surface of the piano. "It still sounds good," she said proudly. "I play it every weekend. Want to hear?" He nodded silently. She sat down and began to play a slow tune. It wasn't one he recognized at first, but after a few notes he realized. It was the same melody his wife had loved to play, slightly changed, softer, gentler, as if the years had reshaped it through her small hands. He felt his eyes sting, the emotion too deep to hide. Her mother noticed and whispered softly. She learned that song by ear. No one taught it to her. He took a deep breath, struggling to speak. "That's incredible. My wife wrote that song. I never thought I'd hear it again." The girl looked up, surprised. "Really? I just played what I heard from the piano the first time I touched it. It felt like it already knew the song." He smiled through his tears. Maybe it did. When she finished, the room stayed silent. He walked up to the piano, ran his hand gently across its surface, and said quietly, "It feels like she's here." The girl looked up at him with innocent eyes and said, "Maybe she is. My dad used to say music keeps people close, even when they're far away. He nodded, unable to find the right words. The truth was, in that moment he did feel her, his wife, her warmth, her laughter, her love. It was all there in the sound of that piano. Before leaving, he placed a hand on the piano once more and said softly, "Thank you." It wasn't clear who he was thanking, the girl, the piano, or perhaps the past itself, but it felt right. Outside, as they walked toward the car, the sunlight glowed gently across the street. The girl looked up at him and asked, "Do you miss her?" He smiled sadly. "Every day. But I think she'd be happy that her piano found you." The girl grinned. "Then I'll take good care of it." He nodded. "I know you will." That evening, after dropping them off, he returned to his quiet home. For the first time in years, he unlocked the door to the small room where his wife's photographs still hung. Dust had gathered on the shelves, but her smile in the frame was as warm as ever. He sat down, remembering the sound of her music blending with the laughter they once shared. Then, for the first time since she passed, he turned on the small radio beside her photo. A soft piano melody played, a song that reminded him of both the past and the present. He sat there quietly, listening, feeling something new grow inside him. It wasn't pain anymore. It was peace. Across the city, in a small apartment, the girl sat by her own piano, playing the same tune she had played for him. Her mother watched from the kitchen, smiling softly. The girl played with her heart full, not knowing that somewhere across town, her music was healing someone's soul. And just like that, the piano that had once been given away out of grief had found its way back. Not to the man who donated it, but to the part of him that still needed music, love, and hope. A few weeks passed since the day the CEO visited the community center. The memory of that piano, and the little girl's music, stayed with him every single day. It was as if something inside him had shifted. The noise of the world seemed softer now, and the silence of his home didn't feel as heavy anymore. Every evening after work, instead of diving into emails and files, he would sit near the window, close his eyes, and remember the melody she had played. It was like hearing his wife's laughter again through the keys. At the office, people noticed a change too. The man who used to be distant and strict now smiled more. He greeted his staff, asked how their families were doing, and even took time to walk around the building without rushing. One morning, his assistant knocked on his door and said, "Sir, the community center called. They wanted to thank you for visiting. The kids can't stop talking about that day." He smiled softly. "That was a special place. Let's make sure it gets whatever support it needs." That week, he quietly arranged for the company to donate new instruments, music books, and funds for classes. But he asked that his name not be mentioned. He wanted the children to simply enjoy the music, not know who had made it possible. Then one evening, while finishing some work, he received a letter. It was written in neat handwriting, signed by the little girl. The letter said, "Dear Sir, thank you for coming to see the piano again. I'm really happy you remembered it. I've been practicing every day. I want to get better so one day I can play in front of big audiences and make people feel what I felt when I first touched that piano. My teacher said there's a music competition at the city hall next month. I want to try, but the entry fee is too much. I'll still go watch others play if I can't join. Thank you for everything you did for the center. It means a lot to all of us. With love, the girl who played at your event." He read the letter twice. Then he sat back in his chair and looked out the window, where the city lights shimmered in the distance. Without hesitation, he called his assistant and said, "Find out who runs that competition. I want her name on the participants list. And make sure she gets the best piano they have." A month later, the night of the competition arrived. The hall was filled with parents, teachers, and students from all over the city. The CEO arrived quietly, choosing a seat in the back row. He didn't want attention. He just wanted to see her play again. The stage lights shone softly over a row of pianos. The judges sat on one side, pens ready. When her name was called, the little girl walked out slowly, holding her music folder. She looked smaller than before under the bright lights, but her eyes carried the same calm confidence. She sat at the piano, took a deep breath, and placed her hands on the keys. The audience went quiet. The first few notes floated into the air, soft and clear. Her fingers moved gracefully, telling a story without words. She didn't just play the notes. She felt them. Each sound carried emotion, like a whisper of memories and dreams. People in the crowd leaned forward, drawn in by the beauty of it. The CEO closed his eyes for a moment, and he could almost hear his wife again. The same rhythm, the same gentle strength. He opened his eyes and saw that some of the judges were wiping away tears. When the song ended, the hall stayed silent for a few seconds before bursting into applause. The girl stood up, gave a small bow, and smiled shyly before walking off the stage. She didn't seem to notice how many people were still clapping. To her, the music was the only thing that mattered. Later that evening, when the winners were announced, she didn't win first place. She came in second, but it didn't bother her. She looked happy, almost glowing. She told her mother, "It's not about winning. I just wanted people to feel something." Her mother hugged her tightly. As they walked out, she saw the CEO standing near the exit, smiling. Her eyes widened. "You came." He nodded. "I told you I wanted to hear you play again." She ran up and said, "Did you like it?" He smiled warmly. "It was beautiful. You played from the heart. That's all that matters." Her mother thanked him quietly for helping with the competition, but he waved it off. "She did all the work. I just made sure she had the chance." Before leaving, he handed the girl a small box. Inside was a silver music note pendant. "For good luck," he said. "So you'll always remember what your music can do." She held it tightly and said, "I'll wear it every time I play." Months passed. The girl continued playing and studying. The CEO often visited the community center, not as a businessman but as a friend. Sometimes he sat in the back of the music room, listening to the children practice. The sound of the piano always filled him with peace. One day, the center decided to hold a special concert to thank their donors. This time, the girl was asked to perform again, not as a child trying to prove herself, but as their star performer. The CEO was invited to sit in the front row. As she began to play, the familiar warmth spread through the hall. Her music carried hope, kindness, and everything she had learned along the way. The CEO felt tears in his eyes again, but this time they weren't from sadness. They were from gratitude. After the concert, the director of the community center took the stage and said, "This piano has been here for many years. It was donated by someone who wanted to bring music to children. Tonight it has brought joy to hundreds. Music has a way of connecting hearts that might never have met otherwise." Everyone applauded, and the girl smiled from the stage, glancing at the CEO. He nodded in return, his eyes shining. Later, when most people had left, the girl and the CEO stood near the piano once more. The lights were dim now and the room felt calm. She asked softly, "Do you think your wife would have liked my playing?" He smiled gently. "I know she would have loved it. She always said music finds its way to the right people. I think she'd be proud of both of us." The girl looked down, then said, "I think she's happy the piano is still being played." He nodded. "So do I." Before leaving, she played one last song, soft and full of warmth. It was the same melody she had played the night of the company event, but this time it sounded fuller, brighter, like the music itself had grown with her. When the final note faded, he whispered, "Thank you for reminding me that music never really ends." She smiled. "It just keeps finding new hearts to play in." The story of the little girl and the CEO spread quietly through the community. People talked about the man who had once lost his love and the child who brought it back through music. It wasn't about wealth or fame. It was about connection, kindness, and the power of something as simple as a piano. Years later, the girl grew up to become a music teacher. She taught children who had never touched a piano before, always reminding them that every note has a story. And in her classroom, on one corner shelf, sat a framed picture of an old man standing beside her and the piano that started it all. Every time she played, she wore the silver pendant. And sometimes, when she looked up at the sunlight shining through the window, she thought she could hear two faint melodies, one from the past and one from the present, blending together in perfect harmony. And somewhere deep inside, she knew that music had done something wonderful. It had healed hearts, built bridges, and turned grief into grace. All because one little girl asked, "Can I play the piano?"